Warning. Viewer discretion is advised. r/AskReddit. Death cleanup cruers. What's the saddest, most disturbing case you've ever had to clean up after? I responded to a single vehicle involved with a moose. The caller was the driver and she had her young, 6-ish, son in the back. They were both okay but afraid and trapped in the car as the moose was lodged into the windshield. We arrived and when we did, the moose woke up and kicked the mother to death trying to get itself dislodged. The boy had to watch the whole thing. We were removing him from the back seat and he said, "My mommy's dead, isn't she?" I'm a volunteer so I'm not used to dealing with things like that. It was heartbreaking. Edit. Spelling. Edit number 2. For all those asking, we had no method of killing the moose. Also, it started kicking her the second our truck showed up, so even if we did have the means to do so, it would likely have been too late. Okay, that's ducking terrible. I would legit cry right there. The dude above my sister's apartment died with a faucet running. One morning, my sister's roommate saw one of those paint water bubbles in the ceiling. It burst and death water flooded their apartment. Everything touching the ground had to be replaced. I work for a railroad and after a collision usually we bring in a service to clean up the mess. However, during the repairs it's not uncommon to find bits of folk. Usually it's like a knuckle or something small, but the company leaves a bucket that we put it in and they will dispose of it later. One of my welders found a wedding ring. That went in a special envelope and was given to the family promptly. Another time they found a shoe under a car that was several cars back. Either way, stay away from the tracks, the trains cannot turn out of the way. My father worked many years as a CSI. More than once a biker versus truck crash required a shovel to scrape the biker remains from the asphalt. Once he found just a mustache still attached to the upper lip, some 20-30 meters away from the crash. Not pretty at all. Was working as a volunteer firefighter in 2011 in a small town in NY. A drunk driver in a truck hit a high school senior who was heading home on his motorcycle. The kid was still alive when we got there, saying how he didn't want to die. I put a tourniquet on his leg to stop the bleeding from his femoral. Leg was pretty mangled. I was talking to him and trying to keep him calm as we put him on the spine board. Then he got really quiet and said, "Thank you for not letting me die alone." Then he died. Messed me up pretty bad for a while how he just wasn't there anymore. By the sound of it, you have him the comfort he needed in his final moments. I can imagine it would be a pretty hard hit to you, but at the time it meant everything to that kid. His parents were really thankful too, were still in touch. I don't know how you guys deal with all the pain that comes with the job. You truly are heroes. I'm in the Marines now, but I'll always be thankful for getting experience with the fire department. One of my friend's dad is a retired correctional officer. One he told me sticks out. He was doing rounds on the catwalk of a big block of cells. Everyone is out on the yard because it was a nice day outside. He goes through some checkpoint to the next block of cells and smells blood. He gets around a corner and sees a guy sitting up in his bunk covered up to his neck with the blanket. Looks pretty normal, but looking down, the whole floor of the cell is completely covered in blood. The bunk is completely soaked with blood. The blanket is soaked in blood. The inmate had made a dam of towels against the bars of his cell to keep the blood from dripping out. He was completely white. He had slit both his wrists and then slit his own throat ear to ear. Almost all of his blood was on the cell floor. Literally, half an inch of coagulated blood over a 5x7 cell floor. You could see the blood losing oxygen, going from bright red to dull purple as it got farther away from the body. He was alone for about 15 minutes tops between everyone getting let out for yard time and the next patrol on the catwalk. The inmate had a double life sentence and had just decided to end it. My dad was a fireman. He said he always lucked out and seemed to miss the horrible shit. But he knew these two firemen who every year took the same day off in July. That day they took off was in remembrance of a ducked up case they were both at where a house was on fire. Going up quick and killing a few of the kids inside before anything could be done to save them. After the fire went out, the two firemen went in to get the bodies. They found two of the kids dead, cuddled in a closet, but they couldn't find the baby. They kept walking around looking for him when one of them realized they were standing on him. Poor little thing, unrecognizable. My dad was a firefighter and they responded to a wreck with a car on fire and they had to peel the dead occupants off of the leather seats they had melted onto. He chose to tell me that story when I was learning how to drive. I've been doing this kind of work for about 6 months, and a month or 2 ago we did a job where a 12-year-old girl shot herself in the head with a .357 while in her parents' bathroom. You can imagine the damage a large caliber bullet would do to a child at point blank range. Even compared to other suicides, there were multiple skull fragments and mats of hair, of which, as a relatively new worker in this field, I had not become accustomed to. No note. Entire family was home at the time. We got there the next day to clean up and we worked 14 hours straight with the mother one room away crying like a banshee. Just the thought that what we were cleaning up was the remnants of such a young child. It really sticks with you. I'm not a professional by any means, but when you work at a large apartment complex, you see a lot of people. Because police officers and actual professionals do not have keys to individual apartments, I will typically accompany them into the apartments for wellness checks. So far in my 3 years at this property we have found 3 deceased. The first was a suicide of a middle-aged man that just decided to end it all. He bought a gun a few days before, gun case and receipt sitting next to him. He sat on the ground and ended it all. Going back to the office where his mother was waiting and seeing her fall to the ground in tears will never leave my mind. The other 2 were older folk who died of natural causes, but both of them sat for 4 days before being found. A lot of people don't realize how quickly we start to decompose after our heart stops pumping. Your fingers, toes, ears, and nose will start to rot and fall off. I have a lot of respect for the people that deal with these things on a day-to-day basis. The few experiences I had put me in a pretty huge funk for quite a while. Murder/suicide. Husband shot wife in the head while sleeping and then himself. Usually I just sort of zone out while doing them and not thinking about it too much, but cleaning the blood splatter off one of their photo frames of them and the kids with the caption "World's Greatest Dad" was pretty sad. Also did a cleanup at a homeless shelter where the woman living there had drank herself to death. Someone at the front desk said her throat eroded from all the alcohol and they threw up blood everywhere. Midway through the cleaning their sister showed up distraught and started stomping through all the blood pools on the floor, digging through everything looking for a note or anything sentimental left behind. Only found empty Svedka bottles and clothing though. Also very sad. My father-in-law was a retired battalion chief in the FDNY when 9/11 happened. He arrived after and was attempting to find people in the rubble. Unfortunately, he spent most of the time collecting shoes and the like so they could be identified. He said sometimes the feet were still in the shoes. Not me, but my best friend. She is the 7th generation of her family's owned and operated funeral home, and for a while she was doing removals. By the way, what a crazy job. Your shift is just to be on call during a period of time, waiting to go get a dead body. She did it for several years before deciding it was too backbreaking. The schedule sucked, and the whole dead body thing. She told me the worst one she did, that it was the only one that the smell made her puke. The majority of her pickups were old people out in the country who were hermits or had little family. This one in particular, as she stepped out of her car she could smell it, and it got worse as she got closer to the house. It was hard to see through the windows because they were curtained with flies. They opened the door and were basically smacked in the face with flies and death. So they let it stand open for a while before entering. When they finally did, they saw what was literally just a puddle of flesh, bones and clothing underneath a hanging noose. I think the body had been there several weeks. The story was something like, an old man lived there and had basically been estranged from his family. His only child lived in LA or something and it wasn't rare to not speak for several months at a time. Very sad and incredibly unfortunate, but this happens more than we know. Obligatory not a crime scene cleaner-upper. My cousin owns a very large, 150 units, trailer park and one of his tenants pulled a murder-suicide. My cousin, being the frugal man he is, decided to clean the place himself. The following Thanksgiving, the topic comes up and at some point, he says, in a thick southern accent, "Man, I'll tell you what, you won't believe how hard it is to get brain out of shag carpet." I remember seeing a story where cleanup workers went to go pick up an elderly lady that died. When they got there they saw the cats eating the top of her face. I believe they said the nose and upper lip was gone. Turns out she wasn't dead, just had a stroke and was paralyzed from the neck down or something. She felt everything apparently. Oh my god, that's horrible. My grandfather was an undertaker for a few years. He told me 2 different stories about picking up bodies. One was a really fat man that didn't have any family, and by the time he was discovered his fat skin had begun to essentially squeeze between the cushions and the couch he died on. While attempting to scoop him out of the couch, his skin came apart and dumped the rotting fatty contents onto the floor. Another one was a man that had shot himself through the mouth with a shotgun, but when they went to pick him up, he only had a bloody nose. The shot hit the inside of his skull just right and then spun around inside of his skull. Not mine, but from an old thread about this. Ooh, I just remembered one. But it wasn't me. It was a colleague of mine. Full summer heat. Body was left for days in his apartment. Smelled all the way to the street from the 4th floor. When they moved him, the skin from his face slipped and fell and my colleague slipped on it, like on a banana peel. He had to take the rest of the day off. This isn't my story, but from my brother. He didn't work with dead people. He worked with dead animals. He told me about the time he and another worker had to clean up a house that was full of dead cats. It turned out a lady bought the house to give shelter to stray cats, but over time she forgot about them and sold the property. When the new owners opened the door, there were dead cats everywhere with a mixed smell of dead and poop. He told me he almost fainted as there were dead cats and kittens everywhere. He quit afterwards because he didn't want to experience that again. I used to date a guy who worked for a body removal service. One man was found, in a state of decay, to have been choked by some sort of homemade pulley choking system in his bedroom. He had a sex toy in his rear, so it looked like autoerotic asphyxiation gone amok. Be safe out there, guys. Choke with a friend. I don't know if this is his most disturbing case, but it stuck with me. Another disturbing pickup he did was when a small car was following too close behind a semi-truck on the expressway. The truck stopped fast and the smaller car got stuck under the truck and was dragged for long enough to catch fire. The man in the small car burned to death and died as he was trying to climb out of his window to jump into traffic from a speeding, burning car. I assume all of this sort of work is disturbing, but what a mercy to be able to die in your sleep. Wasn't the cleanup crew for either of these, but my neighbor always sat outside with his little dog. He was a cool dude. My dad and him were friends, and he wasn't super close to his family from what I understood. We don't see him outside for a couple days. Don't think much of it. Mention one day to my dad that it kinda smells outside, and there must be roadkill somewhere. It's pretty common out here. We live surrounded by woods. We checked on him the next day, dead in the hallway. We think it was a heart attack. First time I ever saw my dad drink. We kept his dog for a while until someone in the guy's family asked if they could take it the other one. My grandfather works for a funeral home, and he does the hair and makeup on the bodies for open casket things. And he had to do the makeup for a little girl, about 4, that died in a house fire. Don't remember how it started, but I remember seeing it on the news. My grandpa is already a pretty quiet guy, but I think that messed him up really bad for a while. Not a pro, but in high school I helped a friend clean out his grandpa's house post-mortem. He had been a surgeon, so his house was full of old medical stuff, which was pretty neat. When we got to the attic, it had the standard trunks of old sweaters etc. But we ran into this stack of cubes about 1 foot on each side wrapped in black garbage bags. It had been a long day, so at first we just started hauling them to the bin. They were weirdly heavy, but we figured they were just old patient records or something. As I was carrying down my second pair, one caught on an edge, ripped open, and out spill copies of Penthouse from the full Bush era. Turns out every single cube was full of 1 year's worth of Playboy, Penthouse, and Hustler. The man must have had every edition of all 3 from about 1965 to 2005. We were 15 at the time, so we had no idea they might actually be worth anything. We ended up tossing nearly all of them in the dumpster. Of course, we each took a couple home and reduced their resale value. He had his phone in his hand. It had Reddit open on it. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking mad lad. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.